My name is Roy Hayes, and for most of my adult life, my voice has been the steady kind, the dependable hum in the background, while other people's music plays. I am the one who remembers trash day, who knows the sound the furnace should make in January, who keeps the tiny Allen key for the chair you swear nobody ever needs. I live alone in Cherry Creek, Denver, in the brick house I bought in the late 1990s and rebuilt board by board, after my wife Ellen fell in love with the way afternoon light crossed the living room. That house was my workshop, and my promise kept. I ran new electrical sistered joists in the crawl space, insulated the attic until summer heat stopped knocking. Out front, I planted roses whose thorns taught me patience and whose blooms once steadied Ellen's hands when the tremors were bad. Every winter I resealed the windows with quiet pride. Inside the pantry always held 5 kinds of mustard because Ellen loved variety even when money was tight, and I suppose I kept buying them because the ritual felt like love you could put on a plate. If you were to walk through the place, then you would find order without show. The garage pegboard had outlines for each wrench and mallet. There was a ledger in the kitchen drawer where I wrote down every repair with the date and the part number, a habit from my years as a construction engineer. And in a different worn notebook, I recorded the kind of expenses that never make a house prettier, but build a life around it. My daughter Caitlin's tuition at the University of Colorado, $48,000 over 4 years. The wedding we threw for her because she deserved a day that felt like a sunrise, $32,000 paid in tidy installments. The time her transmission died and I wrote a check for $3,000 without letting her see the worry on my face. Those dinners at a steakhouse when she and her new husband Jeremy were struggling $200 a night, and I told myself we were buying breath for them. I never thought of any of it as debt owed to me. I thought of it as what you do when you love a person and you want them to feel the floor under their feet is not going to vanish. The neighborhood fit me the way a worn jacket fits your shoulders. On Saturday mornings, I pushed a reel mower while the homeowners association reminded me about fence height with polite letters. I waved, they waved back, and we existed inside the gentle choreography of American suburbia porch lights on at dusk packages at the door. A couple of years ago, porch pirates started cruising our block, so on my sister's insistence, I installed a Ring video doorbell. It was not paranoia, it was housekeeping for the 21st century. I set it to send motion alerts to my phone, and then like most tools, it faded into the background until the day it did not. But that is a story I will unfold exactly when it matters most. For now, know this. I am a man who documents. I save receipts, sync my files to 2 drives label boxes with the exactness of a surveyor. You might think that makes me controlling. I think it makes me calm. When Ellen died, the house felt too quiet in the mornings. There is a silence. Grief makes that is less about sound and more about the way light falls, and you have nobody to say, "Look at that." I kept myself busy. I replaced the copper supply lines under the sink, repainted the hallway. Learned how to bake sourdough because kneading was something to do with my hands when evenings stretched too long. Caitlin visited. Jeremy visited. They called me the responsible one, joked that I loved wood and brick more than people. I laughed along because jokes hurt less when you help shape them. And when Jeremy, who works in finance and never lets you forget it, would make those breezy comments about square footage that could be monetized, I ignored the thin film of disdain on his tone. Everyone has a language for love. Maybe his sounded like numbers. I wanted to believe that. What I did not ignore were the ways need can be disguised as advice. First, it was gentle talk of downsizing. Then, brochures for assisted living communities arrived with circled amenities and handwritten notes about social calendars and chef-prepared meals. There is a version of that pitch that is loving and true. I have seen friends choose it and find gracious community. There is another version where convenience masquerades as concern, where your independence is categorized as stubbornness, where the house you love becomes an asset on someone else's whiteboard. I could not yet tell which version I was living inside, and because I'm a man who prefers measurements to hunches, I told myself I would wait for data. It is important that you hear this. I didn't start from resentment. I started from trust, as fathers do. Even so, small things began to taste different. Caitlin's humor sharpened around the edges, Jeremy's eyes lingered on the hardwoods longer than memories do, and I found myself pausing in the driveway after groceries to look at the front door, at the brass handle I had polished for years, as if it might one day not know my hand. Maybe that was fanciful. Maybe it was the way my mind filled silence now that Ellen did not. But there was a Sunday coming, a date you could circle on any calendar when all the jokes and gentle brochures stepped aside for a single sentence that made the mustard taste like dust. I will tell you that sentence. I will tell you exactly what day and how many hours later the countdown began. This part is important, and I promise I will not leave you in suspense long. For the first time in my life, I was about to choose quiet not as retreat, but as a weapon. And the thing about quiet is it does not echo until the moment you close a door. The first cracks did not roar, they whispered. After Ellen passed, people brought me casseroles and advice, and I thanked them for both. Caitlin came by with glossy brochures for assisted living communities where people my age played cards under downlights and learned watercolor on Thursdays. She underlined amenities with a purple pen and said, "Chef-prepared meals, Dad. You would not have to fix another leaky faucet." Jeremy stood behind her smiling the way consultants smile when they believe they are guiding a client toward a rational outcome. "Square footage like this should be working for you," he told me, gesturing toward the living room I had rebuilt twice. "You could be in a place with an elevator and a gym, lock and leave, liquidity is freedom." He says things like that and expects the syllables to do the caring for him. I set the brochures in a neat stack, made coffee, and told them I would think about it. What I did not say was that I had already done the math they were pretending to do for me. My blood pressure was steady. I walked every morning. I still crawled through this crawl space when a pipe needed eyes. Independence is not a performance, it is a pattern, and my pattern held. Still threads of something else tugged at the edges. I began noticing the vocabulary shift. Stubborn replaced steady, sentimental replaced loyal. When I mentioned resealing the windows before winter, Caitlin sighed. "You cannot keep babying this house forever." That was the first time I heard her call a home a baby, as if care itself were somehow childish. I remembered another afternoon years ago when she locked herself out during a summer thunderstorm and I drove across town with a spare key. She cried in the doorway, and I promised to never throw that key away. I kept it in a small dish by the garage door for years. That memory warmed me, so when I realized recently that the dish had been empty for a while, I filed the observation with the others. I will tell you later why that missing key matters. For now, know that a father who documents also notices what is no longer where it should be. The Homeowners Association sent another letter about my fence height, the same polite scolding they bring to every doorstep on our block. I fixed the fence, waved to Mrs. Patterson, our watchful neighbor, who likes to narrate the street like a gentle sportscaster. "Your daughter was here Tuesday," she mentioned, casual as sunlight. In a hurry, she went right in. I kept meaning to ask if you wanted me to bring your package inside, but she had it covered. I nodded and thanked her. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my ledger. I didn't draw conclusions. I recorded facts. Tuesday. Caitlin entered while I was out. Note package removed. This is important because later when people accuse you of overreacting, a line of ink can be the difference between feeling unmoored and remembering your feet. Jeremy's confidence, meanwhile, bloomed into something florid. At dinner, he painted futures for me that sounded less like concern and more like a spreadsheet humming. "Boulder by fall," he said, "once eyes bright, a place with glass and clean lines. We would visit you every weekend at your new apartment, more efficient for everyone." The words "everyone" did not include me. He loved about me what could be traded: the equity, the space, the idea of a tidy elder who does not make too many decisions. It is easy to confuse a man's calm with his absence. I let him. There are times when a quiet face is a room where another person will tell you everything you need to know. On Father's Day, we went to brunch because America loves rituals you can schedule. We laughed. We ate pancakes and eggs and 2 sweet fruit. Back at the house, Caitlin made a call and set her phone down on the counter without hitting end. "You already know because I promised you that sentence I heard will arrive soon. Before I take you there, I need to lay one final board in the subfloor of this story. A few years earlier, after porch pirates treated our block like their personal sport, I installed a Ring video doorbell. I set it to send motion alerts and to save clips to the cloud. Then I forgot about it the way you forget a smoke detector until it chirps. Unlike some stories you have heard, mine does not involve secret cameras hidden in chargers or any recording after a house changed hands. I am careful with lines. I will remove the device before the house is no longer mine. When you hear later about an alert and a clip, you will know it happened while the deed still spelled my name. That clarity matters, and I am telling you now. So nobody has to wonder which side of the door the law stood on. The signs kept collecting. Caitlin invited me to a marketing conference she would attend in Phoenix later that summer, then laughed and said, "No, you would be bored." Jeremy teased that my garage was a museum of tools for a life I would not let end. They were not villains twirling mustaches. They were people who had grown used to the idea that my life could be managed like an account. That is how greed often arrives in families here, not as a robbery in the night, but as a plan with bullet points, as a wellness check that ends at a sales office. I do not think either of them woke up one day and decided to become cruel. I think they convinced themselves that what they wanted for themselves was also what I should want, and when I didn't mirror them back, they called me difficult. If you have ever been the mirror that refused to flatter you, know the temperature in the room can drop fast. There was a Thursday when I stood in the garage, hand on the pegboard, where the outline for my box cutter waited like a chalk drawing. The dish by the door where the spare key once lived sat empty, and for the first time I could feel the shape their plans wanted me to fit into. Not a father exactly, not even a man, a line item, a set of proceeds. I looked at the door into the house and at the heavy brass knob I had polished 100 times. I understood something that once understood does not unknow itself. A boundary is not a wall until you build it. I closed the door gently and turned the deadbolt with a slow, deliberate click. Later you will see that click echoed. Later you will see what day on a calendar becomes a lever. But first comes the sentence that made the mustard taste like dust, and the moment when a countdown began. Father's Day should have ended with leftover pie and a nap. Instead, it ended with a sentence that made the whole house tilt. Caitlin was rinsing coffee cups, Jeremy was scrolling, and I was drying a plate whose hairline crack I knew by touch. She tapped her phone meant to end the call, and didn't. Her voice was brisk professional, the way she speaks when a meeting's agenda is already decided. He is stubborn. Nursing home this fall. The house is worth almost $1 million. A chair leg whispered against tile. Jeremy's voice answered, full of that weightless confidence he wears like cologne. We move fast, boulder by fall. He will adjust. I did not drop the plate. I set it down the way I set down heavy things on a joist, evenly with respect for the grain. Then I turned off the faucet and said I would take the trash out. In the garage, with the faint scent of motor oil and cut pine, I breathed once, twice, a third time. The dish by the door sat empty where the spare key once lay. I took a pen from my shirt pocket and wrote in my ledger a single line, Sunday, June 16th, 2019. Accidental call overheard. Find attorney. Start clock. I went back inside and folded the dish towel. We ate pie. I asked Caitlin about Phoenix, the marketing conference she might attend later that summer, and she laughed that it would bore me. There is a way to carry a secret in a room without making a sound. You hold it the way you hold a level, steady, bubble-centered eyes on the tiny line that tells you when something is true. That night I slept in my own bed in the soft blue light that used to catch Ellen's hair, and I decided that my answer would be quiet. Not meek, not collapsing, quiet like a closing door that latches the first time. Morning came with birds and a to-do list. Before 8, I called a real estate attorney a neighbor once recommended when a boundary fence turned into a neighborhood saga. Todd Fisher, the receptionist, said, and the name fit the voice on the line when he returned my call just after 9. I did not dramatize. I told him the deed was in my name alone, that my wife had passed, that my daughter and her husband were pushing for assisted living in the fall, and that a conversation about the house's value had accidentally been overheard in my kitchen. Todd asked clear questions, the kind that refuse fog. He confirmed what I already suspected and needed to hear. In clean letters, the house was solely mine. No transfer required, no obligation to discuss disposition with anyone unless I chose to. He explained options: keep, rent, gift, or sell. If you sell, he said, and you want speed and simplicity, a cash buyer with a short inspection window is often the cleanest path. 10 business days from offer to close is achievable if everyone is prepared. 10 business days. The phrase clinked into place like a bolt in a bracket. I thanked him and asked for a referral to a realtor who could move at that pace without leaving a mess. Call Brian Connor, he said. He will underpromise and then hit the date anyway. I hung up and then sat for a minute at the kitchen table with my ledger open. I drew a small box next to the words, Start Clock, and put a tiny checkmark inside. It sounds theatrical when I describe it, but it was not. It was carpentry measure, twice cut once. At 10 past 10, I called Brian. He picked up on the second ring, voice crisp, as if he were already in a listing photo. I described the house without romance, square footage, the roof replacement, the electrical I had redone, the way the south wall caught heat. He asked for 12 photos, then offered to be at my door that afternoon. I said yes. Not because I'm hasty, but because the plan only works if the first board is nailed straight. Before Brian arrived, I did something else that matters for the integrity of this story. I opened the Ring app and checked my settings. Motion alerts on clips saving to the cloud. The device was mine on my network on my wall, and it would remain only while the deed remained in my name. Later, when papers were signed and possession transferred, I would remove it, wipe my account, and hand over clean hardware with the keys. That is a promise I'm making to you now, so that when you hear about a clip on day 8, you can locate it in the law as easily as you locate it on a timeline. I am not a man who peeked into a house he no longer owned. I'm a man who minded his own threshold until it ceased to be his. Brian showed up at 2 in a pressed shirt and boots that had actually seen a crawl space. He walked the property like a careful buyer, not a salesman taking notes about the conditioned crawl space, the attic insulation, the new copper lines. We sat at the dining table with a sunstripe between us, and he proposed a price that was fair and would attract a cash buyer without inviting sharks. "We list Wednesday," he said. "If I do my job and you do yours, we can accept by Friday inspection Monday morning and close by the end of next week, 10 business days, maybe sooner." I nodded. While the house is still mine, I told him I will attend to a few items. I will change the locks for security during showings, log every key, and then deliver the full set to the title company at closing. He didn't flinch, because in this state, seller possession until close is clear, and a man protecting his threshold is not a headline. After he left, I called my bank and scheduled an appointment with a private banker, someone who could open a new account for incoming funds, verify wiring instructions, and set up alerts that would keep my phone honest. I also placed a freeze with the credit bureaus because I've lived long enough to know that money has gravity and that gravity attracts debris. Then I made a list of what would go with me and what would not. Items to keep: the wedding photo, Ellen's music box, the small carving mallet with the smooth handle, the ledger. Items to store: the mid-century desk Caitlin once claimed for a future guest room, the boxes of her trophies, the framed diploma my hands paid for. I called a storage facility on Colfax Avenue and reserved a climate-controlled unit in my name. They emailed a contract and a gate code, paper for everything, signatures on every paper, each step snapped into the file like a clean joint. That evening, Caitlin texted a heart and a calendar emoji as if a weekend could erase the line I had drawn. I sent back a thumbs up and said I loved her. Both were true in their way. Love can be a boundary if you let it. Love can be a locked door that keeps a person honest. I stood at the threshold looking at the brass knob I had polished 100 times, and I heard again the sentence that tried to reduce a life to inventory. Nursing home this fall. House worth almost $1 million. They didn't know a clock had started. They didn't know that I had chosen a kind of revenge you can hear only when paper rustles and a pen lifts off the page. 10 business days is not a long time unless you are the one waiting for a door to open that no longer will. The mustard in the fridge tasted like nothing that night. I wrote that down too. By the following Wednesday, the plan had a heartbeat. Brian arrived with a small team and a camera that made the kitchen glow like a clean memory. He walked through every room again, not selling me on anything, just counting what counted. "We keep the copy tight," he said. "Square footage systems updated, roof replacement, south wall light." He placed a coded lockbox on the side door for showings, and I logged the new keys in my ledger. 3 keys, cut numbered in words, not digits, each tagged with a strip of blue tape. I wrote one note in bold in the margin so I would not forget: deliver every key to the title company at closing. That was not theater. That was respect for the line that separates mine from not mine. Then I did the thing I had told Brian I would do. I changed the locks now, while the house was still entirely and legally in my hands. Eddie the locksmith worked fast, left a receipt, and I slid that receipt into a clear sleeve in the binder I had started just for this. There is a kind of calm you earn by stacking paper and signatures until they can carry weight. I pulled the porch light cover and wiped the glass the way Ellen used to, circular gentle, until the light sat clear as water. The Ring doorbell caught my shoulder as I leaned back. I opened the app, ran a test, and saw my own face in the tiny circle, the same furrow I have worn since the children were small, and corners on coffee tables felt like cliffs. Motion alerts on clips backing up to the cloud, the device operating on the network registered to me. A line item in the binder reminded me: remove device prior to transfer of possession. Later, when a title officer slid a stack of documents across a table and asked for my signature in 3 places, that reminder would be checked off, and the device would be in a box account wiped. Nothing left that tied my eyes to a threshold no longer mine. But that part is later. Right now the house was mine, the threshold was mine, the doorbell was mine, and my quiet was working. Todd the attorney called midday to confirm the title report came back clean. No liens, no surprises. He offered the usual advice about proceeds and taxes, then listened as I explained the next pieces. That afternoon I met with David Morrison at the bank. He opened a new account with layered verification so that one person's panic could never impersonate my own. We set up alerts that would tap my phone like a polite knuckle on wood. He gave me wiring instructions printed on paper with the bank's letterhead embossed in a way that would shame a forger, and I slid those into the binder behind a tab labeled Funds Incoming. I'm not superstitious, but I do believe in arrangements that make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong one. David shook my hand and said, "You are prepared." I answered, "I have been preparing my whole life without knowing it." On Thursday, a man who has bought more houses than most people see in a lifetime walked the property with Brian. No preening, no grand gestures. He checked the crawl space I had conditioned, noted the insulation, asked about the age of the water heater, and nodded when I handed over maintenance records with the kind of dates that reassure a person who understands time is the most expensive material in any structure. He made a verbal offer that afternoon, followed by a written one before dinner. It was fair, clean cash with an inspection window so short it fit inside a weekday. Acceptance by Friday inspection. Monday morning, closing a week from then. 10 business days as promised. I signed not because I needed to get away from the house, but because I needed to get away from the part of me that could be itemized and argued down. Between those appointments, I did the quiet work. I packed the things that tell my story without anyone else in the room, the wedding photo with Ellen's hair caught in light that made it look like a soft flame, the music box with a spring that still becomes a melody if you believe in it long enough, the carving mallet whose handle has taken the shape of my hand. I labeled Caitlin's boxes with the same neat lettering I taught her when she was little, placed them against the wall near the back door, took photos for inventory, and then drove them to a storage facility on Colfax Avenue. The manager slid a contract across the counter. I read it, signed my name, and carried the first boxes down a hallway that smelled like new paint and climate control. They assigned me a unit with a gate code that fell into a rhythm easy to remember. I paid for the first month and tucked the printed receipt beside the wiring instructions in the binder. Later, when I would leave a letter in an envelope, the gate code and unit number would be written in plain language so that someone else could retrieve what belonged to them without drama. Mrs. Patterson. My neighbor waved from her front walk when I returned. She has the tidy dignity of a person who waters plants at the same time every day. "Nice folks at your place today," she said. Polite, took their shoes off. "Your girl stopped by earlier in the week too fast, like she was late for something. I figured she was dropping something off." I thanked her, made no comment, and the quiet between us felt like respect rather than secrecy. In the kitchen, I pulled the ring timeline and scrolled to Tuesday mid-morning. There she was at the door, my daughter moving like a person who has already made a decision and is just arranging details. She let herself in with her own key. The old key I had once handed her for emergencies, and she left with a package tucked under her arm. There was nothing criminal in that, nothing I would call a trespass. But there was a story in the posture, in the way a shoulder squares when a mind has settled on a plan. I placed a still frame from the clip into the binder, more symbol than evidence, and shut the cover. Friday arrived with an acceptance that felt like a calm exhale. The buyer's funds were verified. An inspection for Monday morning went on the books. Brian printed a schedule that looked like a small blueprint. I circled a square labeled Day 8. That would be the day before inspection, the day after acceptance, the day when people who had not asked a single question about what I wanted might suddenly want to step in and claim they had been leading all along. I drafted a letter that afternoon. It said what needed saying and nothing more: that the house would be sold for a clean number, that proceeds would be protected in an account bearing only my name, that Caitlin's boxes sat in a climate-controlled unit on Colfax with a gate code she could use, that I loved her, and that I needed 48 hours of quiet. Then I slid the letter into an envelope and placed it in the drawer by the door where the spare key dish used to sit. I would not deliver it yet. I would set it out only when the moment had arrived, and only while the threshold still belonged to me. There is a sound gravel makes under tires when someone you love pulls into your driveway believing they know how this is going to go. I stood at the window that evening and listened to the street breathe, and I knew that sound was coming. Monday arrived like a plumb line, straight, unforgiving, useful. The inspector came at 9 right on the dot, and I did what a good seller does in this state when the house is still entirely his. I stepped out, left the coded lockbox in place, and let Brian do the talking. He texted me a short list afterward that read like, compliments disguised as tasks, minor caulk at a bathroom seam, a note to label a shutoff more clearly. Praise for the conditioned crawl space and the electrical that would make another tradesman nod. The buyer confirmed acceptance that afternoon. The earnest money sat where it needed to sit. The title company opened a file with my name printed in a font that has soothed Americans for generations. 10 business days had truly begun on the Friday we accepted, and if you are counting, and you should be, Monday's inspection was day 2. The clock did not scare me. It steadied me the way a timetable steadies a train that used to wander. On Tuesday, day 3, Brian and I finalized the final walkthrough plan, not because the buyer worried, but because professionals like clean edges. Cash meant no appraisal delay, and a clean title meant no ghosts. Todd phoned to review the settlement sheet in plain English and to remind me that possession would transfer at closing, not before. I underlined that line in my binder as if someone else might try to borrow the thought before closing the threshold is mine. After closing it, will not be. There is freedom in a sentence that balanced. When we hung up, I opened the Ring app and checked the timeline less for drama than for housekeeping. Clips rolled by like little weather reports, a courier with a box. Mrs. Patterson's watering routine, the inspector's shoes as he tied them on the porch. I downloaded the handful that mattered to a folder marked in my plain handwriting while deed in my name. I did not need proof for a court. I needed proof for my own mind. Wednesday, 4. I moved through rooms like a man folding a flag he respects. I tucked Ellen's music box into a padded case that once held a surveyor's level. I wrapped our wedding photo in 2 layers of brown paper and 1 layer of her favorite scarf before I slid it into a crate. I wrote Caitlin's name on her boxes in letters so neat my high school drafting teacher would have smiled, photographed the contents like a manifest, and placed each box into the trunk without ceremony. At the Colfax Avenue storage facility, I used the gate code they had emailed, signed a paper that acknowledged I had paid the first month, and asked the manager to initial my copy. "You must be an engineer," he said, half teasing. "Retired," I answered, and drove away lighter. That evening, I drafted the letter that would keep the conversation inside sane boundaries. I wrote the number that mattered without digits because sometimes numbers feel lawless in their sharp clothes. The letter said the house would be sold for $890,000 in clean funds, that those funds would land in a private account with my name alone, that her belongings were available on Colfax with a gate code she now possessed, that I loved her, and that I needed 48 hours of silence before we spoke again. I addressed it to Caitlin and Jeremy both. I placed it by the door where the spare key dish once sat, a small relay baton waiting for its race. Thursday, 5. I met again with David at the bank, not to chase money that had not yet arrived, but to walk the path the money would follow. He confirmed the wiring instructions with me verbally and in writing. He added a low-tech note that would make any fraudster weep, a phrase we agreed I would say over the phone before any transfer could be approved. A phrase my daughter invented at 7 when she tried to teach our old dog a trick. I slid the paper with that phrase into the binder behind a tab that simply read, "Voice key." I walked out of the bank into a Colorado afternoon so blue it almost mocked how calmly everything was going. But quiet does not mean nothing is happening. Quiet means the right things are moving at the right speed. Friday, day 6, Brian called to say the buyer had confirmed insurance and scheduled utilities for the day of closing, a Thursday on the calendar that glinted from across the week like a clean blade. Todd sent me the preliminary settlement figure. I read each line and then read it again. Nothing surprised me except how unsurprising it was. I drove back to the house and vacuumed sawdust no one else would have noticed. I wiped down the garage pegboard. I removed a row of nails Ellen once insisted we keep, even though they held nothing, because absence can be a kind of art if you let it. As twilight folded down, I stood in the doorway and heard a single car pass the gravel whisper I had told you about earlier, and I knew how a driveway can tell a story long before a person steps out of a vehicle. Monday, again day 7 of the 10, I signed a lease at Sunset Manor for a 1-bedroom unit that smelled like fresh paint, and the quiet hope of neighbors who water plants at the same time every evening. I paid the deposit and first month about $3,000, and scheduled a move of the few things coming with me. The manager, Mrs. Chen, slid a welcome packet across the desk with a kindness that did not require a biography. I set Ellen's music box on the new windowsill and turned the key once just to hear an unfinished melody. It did not make me sad. It made me ready. I drove back to the house and placed the letter in a visible place on the console table where late light always fell warm. The ring caught my shape in the doorway. I waved at myself like a man promising to finish what he started. Tuesday, day 8. If this story has a hinge, this is it. Caitlin and Jeremy were due back from Phoenix after a long weekend of conferences and curated excitement. They texted once breezy and certain a message that read like a calendar invite to a life I did not choose. I did not answer. I watered the roses, wiped the porch light glass one last time, and stepped inside to listen to the house breathe. Then I locked the door and left, not dramatically, not forever, just for the hour I knew the driveway would tell its story. When the ring alert chimed, I was 3 blocks away in a parking lot shaded by a maple tree, the phone steady in my hand. The camera showed an SUV nose into the drive. Jeremy stepped out first. Confidence walking on 2 legs and Caitlin behind him, keys in hand, the old brass one I had given her years ago for storms and emergencies. She tried the lock. It didn't turn. She tried again, sharper. Jeremy took the key and gave it the kind of twist a man gives when he believes the world is a mechanism that can be forced. The door did not oblige. After a beat that felt like a held breath, Caitlin looked down and saw the envelope. She picked it up. She read the first line. Her mouth made the smallest shape the kind mouths make when a plan evaporates. Jeremy spoke sharp enough that the microphone blurred his words into static. And then they both went very still. The stillness people reach for when they are deciding whether to shout or to think. I closed the app. I didn't replay it. The threshold was still mine. The recording was still mine. The choice to be quiet was still mine. I drove to Sunset Manor and set the binder on the kitchen counter like a finished project. On Thursday, day 10, I would hand over keys and hardware ring device, wiped and boxed every signature where it belonged. But Tuesday was about a different handover, the moment when my silence finally spoke louder than their confidence. Wednesday was day 9, the narrow bridge between a plan and its result. The envelope had already done its work, and my phone glowed with missed calls and messages that rose and fell like the tide. I didn't answer. The letter had asked for 48 hours of quiet, and keeping my own word matters to me as much as making others keep theirs. I set the phone on the counter face down and opened my binder. On the left sat the title company's checklist, simple as a grocery list. On the right, a page labeled Transfer sat ready for 3 things: keys, codes, and courtesy notes. I began with the easy part. I wrote a short letter to the buyer, a stranger who would soon walk my halls and learn where the morning light falls best. I told him which breaker feeds the garage when the sprinklers like to run and the way the south wall keeps heat if you treat it kindly in winter. It cost me nothing to be decent, and it ensured that when I closed the door behind me, I left order instead of confusion. Late morning, Brian called to confirm we were still on track for a Thursday closing. He had the even voice of a person who knows exactly how many steps a clean deal requires. All set, he said. Funds verified. Title clear. We meet at 10. He paused. Not nosy, just professional. Do you need me to handle any unexpected visitors? I told him no. The letter had asked for silence, and silence was what I would keep. What I did ask was simple, that the lockbox code be changed after the final walkthrough to ensure no one wandered through the threshold out of habit. He agreed and we hung up. I opened the ledger and made the note in the measured handwriting that has followed me since drafting class day 9 lockbox code updated after walkthrough. At noon, I did the last task my binder had warned me not to forget. I unscrewed the Ring doorbell from the brick, cradled it in a towel, and carried it inside. I opened the app, removed the device from my account, and wiped the settings until the screen returned to the blank face it wore when I bought it. The clips that mattered had already been saved in a folder labeled Wild Deed in my name. There would be no more recording from this device, not another second of footage. It would be boxed with the courtesy items for the buyer or kept with my tools if he preferred to install his own. I wrote one line in the binder that soothed the part of me that loves a clean-edge device removed before transfer of possession. Then I set the box doorbell by the keys like a tiny punctuation mark telling the sentence to end where it should. In the afternoon, I walked the room, slowly stopping when something caught me. Ellen's favorite curtain hook had a tiny nick in it that looked like a crescent moon. The scuff on the baseboard in the hallway was from the time Caitlin practiced a cartwheel and misjudged her feet. I did not try to sand history away. I left it as a polite ghost for the next person to consider. In the garage, I wiped the pegboard and removed the outlines I had drawn around each tool, a small mercy so that the new owner would not feel haunted by shapes that no longer matched what he owned. I gathered every key I had cut. 3 house keys, 1 garage key, 1 mailbox key, and slid them onto a ring tagged with blue tape. Each label written out in words. I added the remotes for the garage door and the laminated card with the alarm code, and then I sealed everything in a pouch marked for title. A life is often reduced to what can be handed over in a small bag. It felt both strange and correct. Toward evening, I drove to the bank to say one more time what would happen the next morning. David, my private banker, met me with that patient competence bankers use to practice before speed became a virtue. We reviewed the wiring instructions on paper and on his screen. He read the account numbers aloud. I read them back. He asked for the phrase we had agreed would serve as a voice key for any confirmation call, and I said it a silly line that once made a 7-year-old girl laugh in a golden mutt tilt his head. We shook hands. "When the funds arrive, we will call you," he said. "No transfers, no changes until you and I speak and the phrase is spoken." I nodded, grateful for a process that slows down precisely when panic usually tries to speed men up. The amount itself was only a number 890,000, but what it represented was not a number. It was the cost of a boundary rebuilt in quiet. On the way home, I passed the storage facility on Colfax and pulled in without planning to. I keyed the gate code and walked the cool hallway to my unit. Inside the boxes with Caitlin's name sat along the far wall, labels squared up, contents photographed and printed in a slim folder beneath a strip of blue tape. I checked the lock, tugged twice, and left. On my phone, still face down, more messages stacked. The first ones had been frantic and hot. The recent ones had cooled into attempts at reason, then curdled into scorn when reason did not hand them what they wanted. I read none of them. The letter had asked for 48 hours, and there were still hours left. Silence is a discipline. It is also a gift to your future self, who will someday be grateful you did not answer anger with anything that can be screenshot. Mrs. Patterson waved from across the street as I parked. "Tomorrow is the big day," she called. I crossed the road and thanked her for not turning our block into commentary. She smiled. "Some things deserve to be watched without being talked about," she said. "You taught me that just by the way you keep your porch light clean." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. Back inside, I wiped that porch light one last time in a slow circle the way Ellen once taught me, and I felt the old calm settle. I set the binder by the front door. I placed the pouch of keys beside it. I checked the letter to the buyer and paper clipped it to the stack. Then I walked through each room and touched one surface, not to claim it, but to say thank you. When I reached the door, I locked it and held the deadbolt for the length of one slow breath. In the silence, I could almost hear a page turning. Night gathered without drama. I slept at Sunset Manor with the window cracked and the music box on the sill ready to play a few notes if the dark stretched. In the morning, I would sit at a table beneath fluorescent lights and sign my full name more times than seemed necessary. I would hand a pouch of keys to a title officer. I would answer a call from David, say a phrase that would sound ridiculous to anyone else, and feel the bottom of a number arrive in my account with a satisfying finality. None of that felt like a fight. It felt like carpentry, measure, cut, fit, and do not force what was never meant to be wedged. The quiet revenge I had chosen was almost finished. It had never raised its voice. It had simply closed a door at the exact second the latch was designed to catch. Thursday dawned like clean paper. I woke at Sunset Manor to the small clink of Ellen's music box when the curtain brushed it, and for a moment I let that sound mark the hour the way church bells used to mark towns. Day 10, closing day. I brewed coffee, opened my binder on the kitchenette counter, and reviewed the last 3 tabs: keys and code sealed in the pouch for title, the box with the doorbell device wiped and ready should the buyer want it, and the bank sheet with wiring instructions in heavy ink that would make a counterfeiter cry. My phone pulsed with messages I had not read. The letter had asked for 48 hours of quiet, and those hours did not end until today. Keeping my own word steadied me more than any reply ever could. I parked outside the title office with 20 minutes to spare because I've never liked being hurried when paper is serious. Brian was already there, leaning against his car, with the relaxed posture of a man who knows a job, finished well, will never need defending. Inside the closing, officer led us to a room with a polished table and fluorescent lights that made everything look like it had always been meant to be read. She slid a stack of documents toward me and spoke with the kind of calm you hear from a pilot who has done this flight 1,000 times. Deed of trust, reconveyance, seller's affidavit, settlement statement, acknowledgments. I held the pen reel ink, not a stylus, and signed my full name in slow letters that have not changed since drafting class. The buyer, a quiet man with careful eyes, nodded once across the table in a way that felt like two carpenters approving the same joint. When the closing officer asked for keys, I placed the blue-tagged ring in her hand. 3 house keys. 1 garage key, 1 mailbox key, written out in words on the tags because numbers sometimes invite shortcuts. I added the laminated alarm card and the garage remotes. Then I set the small box containing the doorbell on the table. Device is wiped, I said. Removed yesterday, account cleared. You are welcome to it if you like. The buyer smiled. I have my own system, he said, and pushed it back toward me. The closing officer checked the list, drew one neat line through transfer items, and the room exhaled. We signed the last page, and the closing officer announced what felt less like victory than completion. Recorded by county later today, funds to disperse upon confirmation. The phrase disperse upon confirmation is not poetic, but to a man who loves clean edges, it is as good as a benediction. My phone buzzed. Brian tilted his head at me, a small permission to look. The caller ID displayed the bank. I stepped into the hall. David's voice carried that steady patience I had picked him for. Roy, he said, we have the incoming wire. Before I proceed, may I have our phrase? I said it, the ridiculous line a 7-year-old once shouted at a golden mutt who never quite learned to jump on cue. David laughed softly, not at me, but with the memory embedded in the sentence. Confirmed, he said. Funds posted. No transfers until we speak again. He read the amount in words, and I repeated the same words back to him, $890,000 clean. He did not rush to hang up. He waited while I took a breath that felt like setting a final nail without splitting the grain. When I walked back in, Brian read the answer on my face before I spoke. We shook hands. The buyer stood, thanked me for the letter I had left describing breakers and sprinklers and the south wall's temperament, and said he hoped his family would learn the house the way mine had. I told him I hoped the light would be kind to them. Then I left the room without dramatics, the way you close a door that has already taught you everything it needed to. Outside, my phone vibrated so hard it felt like a trapped insect. I did not open the messages. The letter's 48 hours were complete, which meant I could reply if I wished, not because panic demanded it, but because I had regained the authority to set terms. I sat in the car and typed one text to Caitlin, careful as a measured cut. I wrote that the sale had closed, that proceeds were secure in an account, only I controlled that her boxes were available on Colfax with the same gate code as before, and that I was willing to speak on Saturday afternoon in a public place of her choosing. 30 minutes, 2 coffees, no raised voices. I attached a scan of the storage receipt and the inventory photos because evidence is a language even grief can hear. Then I set the phone face down again. If an answer came, it would wait until the coffee did. On the drive back to Sunset Manor, I saw Denver the way you see a city after a storm has edged past the same buildings, the same sky, but a clarity you can taste. I did not feel triumphant. I felt accurate. I had said what I would do, and I had done it in order. The quiet revenge was never about humiliation. It was about removing the leverage that love should never give in the first place. The house was no longer a bargaining chip. It was a home that would belong to someone who wanted it for itself, not for its ability to transform a spreadsheet. At the apartment, I set the binder on the counter and opened to the tab marked after. There were only 3 items. 1, update the address with the post office in every place that still believes mail can solve every problem. 2, schedule a gardener for the small balcony planter where this weekend I would bury a new rose that did not know history. 3, call Todd to confirm there were no dangling wires, legally speaking. I checked item 1, then called Todd. He congratulated me not like a man celebrating a conquest, but like a craftsman satisfied a beam had passed inspection. You built a clean boundary, he said. That is harder than building a wall. When we hung up, I took the doorbell box and set it on the shelf with my tools, not as a trophy, just another instrument for another day. Only then did I play the music box. The melody did not finish because it never does. It is a spring, not an orchestra. It is enough. I stood at the window and watched late morning flatten into afternoon, and I knew what the next part of the story would demand, a conversation with a daughter who had mistaken my calm for a blank space she could write in. I would not punish her. I would not absolve her. I would ask her to listen. And if she could not, then that would be a different kind of closing. What they had not understood until this morning was simple. You cannot evict a man from his dignity. You can only discover too late that it was never for sale. The phone chimed once on the counter. I let it sit. I will tell you what the message said and what I answered in the next part. This is important. Saturday came with the kind of sky Denver saves for offerings and difficult conversations. Caitlin chose a small coffee shop near Washington Park Public Neutral, the kind of place where voices stay even. I arrived early, set 2 cups on the table, one black one with the amount of cream Caitlin used to ask for when she studied for midterms at our kitchen counter, and opened my binder only to the page that mattered, a single sheet titled in my careful script, "What Belongs to Whom?" When Caitlin walked in, she looked younger than yesterday's messages tried to sound. She slid an old brass key onto the table like a coin in a grief economy and said, "What did you do?" I took a breath and answered the way a carpenter answers a question about a beam, directly with load paths and sequence. I sold a house that belonged to me. I moved what is yours into storage on Colfax, labeled and inventoried. I put the proceeds somewhere safe under my name. I will share time with you. I will not share this account. Her eyes filled and then cleared in a way that told me she wanted to outrun embarrassment by choosing anger. "Jeremy says you blindsided us," she said. "He had a plan." "I know," I said. I heard it, not because I was snooping, but because a phone was set down and the sentence walked into my kitchen uninvited. "You were planning a fall in a place with chef-prepared meals and a calendar of watercolor classes. That is not a crime. It is also not my life." She reached for the key again, then thought better of it, letting it sit the symbol that it was in the middle of the table. "You could have talked to us," she said. "We could have decided together." I shook my head because truth sometimes requires refusal. What you wanted to decide together was what I would give away. A person can discuss preferences with family. A person does not negotiate away his agency. That is not a consensus. That is a surrender with nicer fonts. I slid a thin folder across to her photos of her labeled boxes, the unit number, the gate code written in words, the storage receipt stapled to the back. "Your belongings are waiting. No drama necessary." She looked at the photos, then back at me. "So that is it. You cut us out. You cut me out." I did not flinch. "No," I said. "I cut out a plan that treated me like a line item. You are not cut out. You are my daughter. You call me on Sundays. We can have dinner on Wednesdays. I will need help sometimes with heavy things. You will need help sometimes with heavier things than boxes. We can meet each other there if you want to." The barista called a name that was not ours. The quiet background music pressed on, and for a moment we were just another pair trying to relearn family at a public table. When she spoke again, her voice lost that professional edge that had crept into our house these past months. "Jeremy is furious," she said. "He says you turned us into cautionary tales. I kept my face as placid as a lake in early morning. I turned myself back into a person I said. Whatever stories people tell about themselves after that is not mine to edit." I told her we were meeting today not to relitigate what had already been measured and cut, but to set terms for contact that would keep us from weaponizing love. "No surprise visits," I said. "If you want to come by the apartment, you tell me first. If you ever feel tempted to use my health as leverage in a conversation about money, we hang up and try again the next day. If anyone pressures me to sign anything, I will decline. And if that pressure continues, I will consult the agencies whose job is to make sure older adults are not bullied. That is not a threat. That is the fence line of my dignity." Caitlin folded the folder shut and placed her palm on top of it, as if warmth could make facts soften. "We never wanted to hurt you," she said, and I believed half of that sentence. "We wanted, I do not know, stability." I smiled the way you smile when you love a person more than you love being right. "Stability is not a house you own with a pen," I said. "It is a boundary you respect because the person behind it matters to you." We talked for a while about smaller things. Work, whether the roses survived the last hail, a memory of Ellen laughing at the way their golden mutt barked at thunder. When the cups were empty, Caitlin picked up the brass key and closed her hand, then set it down again, this time farther from her. "It does not fit anything anymore, does it?" she said. I shook my head. "It fits the story where you can always come home as my daughter," I said, "but it does not open doors that belong to strangers." She nodded. "I will tell Jeremy we are done with the house," she said. "At least I am." Before we stood, I gave her one more page. It was not legal paperwork or storage logistics. It was a list of moments I had never asked for a thank you on: the tuition, the car transmission, the steakhouse dinners folded between months when they were finding their feet. Not because I want credit, I said when she started to speak, because I need you to remember, love looks like tasks more often than it looks like speeches. I'm not asking for repayment. I'm asking for a change in vocabulary. She slid the brass key back to me finally, as if it weighed too much for her pocket. Keep it, she said quietly, as a reminder. I slipped it into my binder to sit under the tab that read After. We stood. She surprised me by hugging me first. It was not dramatic. It was careful, and care when done right is dramatic enough. I didn't hear from Jeremy that day. The quiet was not truce. It was a recalibration of angles. On Sunday evening, when I watered the rose, I had finally bought for my new balcony a hardy shrub with the unromantic name of a survivor. My phone pinged with a message thread that did not come from Caitlin. A colleague from the construction days had forwarded a screenshot from a professional networking site. Jeremy, bright as a brochure, had posted a humble brag about unlocking family equity and optimizing elder transitions with a photo that showed Boulder foothills, tinted Instagram pretty. It was the same language he had tried on me, now aimed at an audience that did not know the backstory. I would have ignored it. The internet is where people talk to themselves. But beneath the post, a client I vaguely recognized from a prior holiday dinner had commented a question shaped like a warning. Is this about your father-in-law? Compliance might have thoughts about conflicts here. The thread did not get far. Screenshots, however, never need distance to travel. On Monday morning, my doorbell, not the old one, but the beige rectangle that came with the apartment, rang, and a courier left an envelope from a law firm whose letterhead was all corners and confidence. It was not a lawsuit. It was a request. Jeremy's firm, faced with a potential complaint related to elder financial exploitation optics, wanted to clarify whether any advisory role had existed in my sale or in the disposition of my assets. They asked for a brief statement. I sat at my small table and wrote one paragraph that sounded like the man I had been training myself to be all week: factual, sparse, unafraid. I stated that the home had been solely in my name, that no advice from Jeremy or anyone at his firm had been solicited, paid for, or followed, that any statements about unlocking family equity were not authorized by me, and that proceeds of my sale were not invested through that firm and would not be. I did not enclose a closing statement. Instead, I attached a notarized affidavit repeating those facts in a brief confirmation letter from Todd's office on attorney letterhead, verifying that title had been solely in my name and that no third-party advisory relationship existed in the transaction. Where documents referenced account information or any buyer identity, those lines were fully redacted. I offered, should further proof be required, to have the title company respond directly to a formal request. I did not editorialize. I did not add, "and please teach your people to keep families out of their pitch decks." I did not need to. The request had found its answer without handing strangers any detail that did not belong to them. By midweek, Caitlin texted 3 words. He is suspended. She did not add exclamation points or commentary. We were both learning economy. I replied with 6. I'm sorry it came to this. She asked if I had made a complaint. I told her no. Someone else, perhaps that holiday client. Perhaps a colleague who saw the post had nudged the machine. This was not fireworks revenge. This was wires crossed and protective systems doing what they were designed to do when pride forgets to be careful. He says you ruined him, she wrote. He ruined his own peace, I answered, and then, because I am not a man who enjoys being right at the cost of a relationship, I added, I will meet you again Sunday at the same place if you want. On Sunday, she arrived without the old key and without the weight she had carried earlier in the week. We spoke not about penalties and HR protocols, but about rent, groceries, and how to extract yourselves from a plan that has turned into a net. I told her about a class at the community center where I was considering teaching basic home maintenance to people newly on their own. How to find a shutoff, how to read a breaker, how to listen to a furnace and know if it is crying or just speaking. You would like it, I said. It is satisfying to make someone less afraid of the place they live. She smiled the way she did when she was little and conquered a task she had made too big in her head. Maybe I will take the class, she said. Maybe we both will. That night, alone in my apartment, I dialed a number I had written on a yellow card. Todd had given me adult protective services. I did not file a report. I asked for information. The woman on the line answered in the voice of a person who does paperwork that saves people and knows it. She explained what constitutes coercion, what documentation matters, what steps are available when conversations turn into pressure. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't plan to use that number on my family. I planned to keep it the way you keep a fire extinguisher, not as a threat, not as a decoration, but as a tool that lets you sleep. Quiet is not the same as absence. It is the room you make so better words can fit. Over the next 2 weeks, the rhythms of my new life settled like lumber, resting true after a cut. In the mornings, I walked the loop around the apartment complex, nodding to the same dog walkers at the same corners. I registered the address change everywhere. The bureaucracies of a country ask you to remain legible. I set up a simple estate plan with Todd for the avoidance of doubt, as he liked to say, stating that I intended to live where I chose, move if and when I chose, and distribute what I owned in a way that felt like love instead of apology. In the afternoons, I volunteered at a workshop run by a community makerspace. My hands remembered how to guide other hands. When the coordinator asked if I would teach a monthly course called Know Your House, I said yes. We picked a Saturday, explained that every tool would be supplied, and promised that no one would be asked to lift anything heavier than a sense of helplessness. Caitlin came to the first session, hair pulled back, cheeks bare of armor, a notebook in the crook of her elbow like a truce flag. When I showed the class a water shutoff, she smiled at the memory of a flood that never happened because someone knew which way to turn a valve. When I handed out simple voltage testers, she bit her lip in concentration. At the end, she hugged me longer than she meant to and whispered, "Thank you for not making me earn this." We did not mention Jeremy. We didn't need to. The silence around his name was not punitive. It was a perimeter around a wound still learning whether to scar or to heal. Later, over tacos at a place where a man of my age does not expect to feel trendy, she told me she had apologized to Mrs. Patterson for the fast walk-in on that Tuesday, and the older woman had waved it away with that same grace she waters flowers with. She said, "You keep your porch light glass clean." Caitlin laughed. She said that makes the whole block look cared for. It was a silly compliment. It was also the truest one I could have asked for. A week later, a letter arrived from Jeremy's firm. Administrative leave had become a formal warning paired with mandatory ethics training. There was a paragraph about online posts and how the past tense feels safer than a plan stated out loud. There was no apology to me, nor did I expect one. People who build their identities on momentum do not know how to step back in words, even when their feet have already retreated. I folded the letter and filed it not under vindication but under documentation. The scorekeeping part of me, a part I do not like, wanted more. The larger part of me, the one that knows which beams carry which floors, understood that this was enough. Consequences had landed where they were owed without my pushing. Dignity had remained in my hands, lightened and warm. Sometimes I catch myself imagining the life I did not choose, the assisted living brochures opened on a table, a calendar full of careful entertainments. I do not disdain those places. I might even choose one someday of my own will, when the maintenance of independence becomes greater than its gifts. When that day comes, I want it to be a door I open, not one I am escorted through. That is the point of all this, the sentence I keep finding different ways to say, the door of my life opens from the inside. If you are listening and you have been told otherwise, check the hinges, check the lock, check the name engraved so small no one else reads it unless you hand them a magnifying glass. It is yours. At the end of the month, I planted the rose on my balcony. I pressed soil around the roots the way a father presses letters into a page, firm enough to hold, gentle enough to let breath through. The plant will not remember the house where a different rose once grew. It will not remember the porch light glass or the outline of tools on a garage wall. It will only go where light points it. That is not forgetting. That is the plant version of forgiveness. I can live with that. Summer turned its shoulder toward fall. I taught a second class, then a third. The regulars started calling me the man who makes breakers less scary. I would have preferred a nickname with more poetry, but poetry has never been my trade. Caitlin found a new job where words like burn rate and runway did not leak into dinner. She and I met on Wednesdays for sandwiches and walks ritual without performance. Once she said I had to block a few people who preferred the old story where we were doing you a favor. I told her that sometimes the block button is a kind of fence, and fences, as Mrs. Patterson would say, keep the right things in when they are at the right height. Jeremy did not attend our Wednesdays. He had moved to a smaller firm, one that did not mind confidence as much as it minded attention. Our contact stayed polite and rare, the occasional group text about holidays that we answered with logistics and nothing more. One afternoon, as I was closing up after a class, a student in her 20s lingered to ask a question that had nothing to do with pipes or wire. "How did you know when to choose quiet?" she asked. "It is not a technical inquiry, which means the answer is never the same twice." "I chose it when speaking would have turned into performance," I said. "I chose it when I realized the audience kept changing, but the script never would. Quiet is not silence. Quiet is a decision to be heard by the person who has to live with the consequences." She nodded like a person pocketing a tool she will need later. When she left, I wrote the exchange in my ledger, not because I am sentimental, but because truth, like maintenance, prefers a schedule. In early fall, Mrs. Patterson brought me a small photo of my old porch at dusk. The new owners had hung a wind chime where the porch light used to catch moths. "They keep it clean," she said, a simple blessing. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt the rightness of objects belonging where they are used and loved. I thanked her and taped the photo on my apartment wall beside the binder's shelf. The binder itself had grown thinner tabs, removed tasks, turned into past tense, a life reorganized behind simpler headings. I kept one tab, though the one labeled after. Under it, I tucked the brass key Caitlin had tried to return and then placed in my hand when she realized it did not fit anything metal anymore. Sometimes on hard afternoons, I hold it like a coin from a country I left without regret. On a Sunday evening when the air smelled like the first promise of cold, Caitlin and I sat on the balcony watching the rose decide whether to keep blooming a little longer. "Do you think we can be 1,000 different versions of family and still call it the same word?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "if we keep the letter and change the font." She laughed, the kind of sound that used to make Ellen set a hand on my arm just to feel it. "One more question," Caitlin said. "Do you ever wish I had not left my phone line open on Father's Day?" I thought about answering with a joke to make her feel lighter. "I did not. I wish I had not needed the sentence it brought into the kitchen," I said, "but I'm glad I heard it. It saved us years of pretending." She nodded. "We clinked cups the way people do when they promise to keep telling the version of the story that holds the most light. The last time I drove past the old house, the sky had that blunt Colorado blue, and a kid's bike leaned against the porch the way abandoned joy always looks, like a pause, not a mistake. I did not slow down. The house does not owe me anything, and I do not owe it my shadow. I went to the workshop instead and made sure the next class had enough testers and that the handouts said what they meant to say in short words. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a message from Caitlin, a photo of her in a kitchen where sunlight made a rectangle of gold on the floor. "We are okay," she wrote. "It is a small sentence. It is large enough. People ask for morals at the end of stories, the way children ask for snacks after a long drive. Here's what I have to offer, and then I will let the engine idle down. Love is not a claim. It is stewardship. If a person tries to turn you into a plan, listen for the quiet you can choose. Draw your lines while your hand is steady and show your work the way good math teachers used to require. Keep a ledger, not because you need proof for court, but because you need proof for the nights when fear edits the past. When you build a boundary, build it like you would build a load-bearing wall, plumb level within code signed by the right people, admired by no one who loves shortcuts. If you must use a tool like Adult Protective Services or a bank's slow procedures, use them with respect and without theater. These systems are fences too designed to keep wolves from learning your porch light schedule. I am not a hero. I am a man who remembered that paper and signatures are sometimes the only language pride understands. I am also a father who wants his daughter at his table, not at his bedside filling out forms he never agreed to hand her. If you are listening and you have found yourself on either side of my story, here is the closing question I carry around like a pocket level. Which door are you holding, and who does the handle face? If your answer makes you uneasy, you still have time to turn it around. I believe in turns. I believe in afternoons when a music box only plays half a song, and that is enough to get you to the window. I believe in roses that do not remember, but still lean toward warmth. The binder lives on my shelf thinner now, a relic of a project that is not a project anymore. Sometimes I open it to the page with the brass key taped down and read the 3 words I wrote beneath it in the neat print drafting school trained into my hand. I am here. That is all the proof I need that quiet chosen carefully can be the loudest defense a person ever mounts. So if you have ever been blindsided by family greed or trapped by the soft grammar of plans made in your name, leave the name of your city in the comments. Not because I need to count them, but because seeing your place in words is the first step toward claiming the ground under your feet. Subscribe if you want to watch pride miscalculate again. It does often. It will again. And someone, maybe you will measure twice cut once and close a door at the exact moment the latch was designed to catch.